You're not stuck because you lack a plan. You're stuck because every step you take was whispered by a voice that isn't yours. It started early, maybe before you could even name it. An expectation here, a fear there, a small betrayal of your own instinct, just to be loved, just to be safe. And little by little, the map of your life stopped reflecting your desires and started echoing your wounds. You wake up, you organize, you schedule, you plan, and beneath it all, there's a silence. A silence that asks, who are you doing this for? This isn't about discipline. This isn't about setting goals. It's about the quiet agony of living in autopilot, locked inside a story you didn't write, a script written by fear, edited by trauma, directed by everything you were taught not to feel again. Jung once said, until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate. You thought your plans would give you freedom, but they've become the chains, elegant, polished, socially acceptable, because every time you sit down to plan, you're not creating the future. You're editing the cage, reinforcing the bars, polishing the walls of your prison with bullet points and deadlines. The more you try to fix your life through strategies, the more you avoid what actually hurts. The internal script that says, be useful, be productive, don't feel that again, don't fail, don't stop, or they'll see you. But what if the real change begins the moment you betray that voice, the version of you built to survive, even if it meant losing yourself? Because maybe this isn't about building something new. Maybe it's about finally dismantling what was never yours. As Nietzsche wrote, freedom is the will to be responsible for oneself. So here's the question. Can you look at the life you've planned and admit it might have been nothing more than a defense? Can you look in the mirror and whisper, I don't want to be who I became to be safe? And if you can, then maybe, just maybe, this is where your story begins. You think you're getting organized, fixing your life, creating clarity. But beneath the structure, beneath the to-do lists and the calendar blocks, there's something else, a subtle tremor, a fear that planning helps you numb. You're not afraid of failing. You're afraid of what you might feel if success doesn't fix you. If after everything, the silence inside still echoes the same questions. So you fill your hours, you rearrange your week, you tell yourself it's progress, but deep down it's a strategy, not to move forward, but to delay the confrontation with who you've become. There's a name for this, avoidance-based coping. It's when you don't fight the problem, you just build a fortress around it. You plan not to act, you plan to postpone, to stay in motion, without actually moving. Because as long as you're planning, you don't have to face what's underneath the surface. The version of you that is exhausted, disconnected, maybe even hollow. The version of you that feels like a ghost, wearing the clothes of a functioning adult. This productivity, it's a mask. A brilliant, socially admired way of hiding. Because no one questions the one who looks busy. No one asks why your plans are always evolving, but you remain the same. You keep building systems, but systems won't save you from yourself. They only delay the encounter. And deep down, a part of you already knows that behind your ambition is anxiety, behind your strategy is sadness, and behind your need to optimize everything is the terror of sitting still and hearing your real voice. So you plan again, because the plan is clean. The plan is safe. The plan doesn't cry at night. The plan doesn't ask, why do I feel so empty even when everything seems under control? But the truth, you were never meant to be managed. You were meant to be met, fully, brutally, honestly. And until that happens, no amount of planning will make you feel alive. You didn't choose this identity. It was layered onto you, word by word, rule by rule, silence by silence. First came the expectations, then the rewards, then the punishments disguised as love. And somewhere along the way you stopped being a person and started becoming a performance. You act, you adapt, you smile at the right moments. You answer how you're supposed to, and you begin to believe that this mask is you, but it's not. It's a patchwork of everything you thought you had to be in order to be safe. A costume tailored from childhood fears, parental projections, and moments where your real self was too much, too loud, too emotional, too fragile. Jung called it the persona, a socially acceptable self, crafted not from truth, but from survival. And the tragedy is, you wore it for so long it fused with your skin. You forgot the difference between obedience and authenticity. You started confusing acceptance with love. And now, even in your quietest moments, the role continues, rehearsed, polished, intact. You've built a life around it, a job, a relationship, a routine. But under all that, there's a stranger. Someone you abandoned. Someone whose voice still whispers in your dreams when the persona sleeps. This is not just about identity, it's about consent. You never consented to this script. You were trained into it, rewarded for disappearing, punished for being whole. And maybe now the exhaustion you feel isn't from doing too much. It's from being someone you're not for far too long. There's a grief that comes with realizing this. The grief of losing a version of yourself that was never really yours. But there's also liberation, because if this life is a script, you can stop acting, you can forget your lines, and in the silence that follows, maybe for the first time you'll hear your real voice again. It looks like progress. It feels like responsibility. But what if your obsession with planning is just a quiet way of managing your fear? Not the fear of failure, the fear of being directionless, the terror of drifting inside yourself without a map. So you build routines, you fill your calendar, you strategize, analyze, refine, and every step gives you the illusion that you're taking control. But control is not clarity, and structure is not safety. What you're really doing is sedating the chaos, not facing it, not healing it, just numbing it with precision and productivity. There's a pain beneath the spreadsheet, a fracture beneath the focus, and no matter how flawless the plan, it won't stop the ache of not knowing who you are beneath the structure. You're not planning to move forward. You're planning to stop feeling lost, but loss isn't always a sign of failure. Sometimes it's the first crack in the script, the moment your real self starts breaking through. Existential fear is not weakness. It's the aftershock of years spent obeying a life that never belonged to you, and now the rituals you use to feel in control are the very chains keeping you from freedom. You're trying to map your way out of the abyss, but the abyss isn't outside you. It's the space between who you are and who you've been pretending to be. And maybe, just maybe, you don't need another plan. You need to sit with the silence, not to escape it, but to understand what it's been trying to tell you all along. There's a strange loyalty inside you, a devotion not to truth, but to continuity, as if changing who you are now would somehow betray everything you've survived. So you keep playing the part, even when it's killing you. Even when your chest tightens every morning, you wake up to the same version of your life, because to change the script now means admitting you were wrong about who you thought you had to be. And that kind of honesty, it feels like disintegration. But maybe disintegration is necessary. Not destruction, just the unraveling of an identity built on fear, silence, and self-abandonment. The mind resists this. Cognitive dissonance, the ego's last stand. You don't want to feel like a liar. You don't want to face the years you spent running in the wrong direction. So you rationalize, you tell yourself it's too late, that this is who you are now. You wear your consistency like armor, even though it weighs more every day. But here's the truth you don't want to say out loud. You are not evolving because you are too loyal to the identity that helped you survive. And that identity, however brave, however resourceful, was built in darkness. It was built when you didn't know better, when you still thought love meant obedience, when silence felt safer than self-expression, And now, the only thing standing between you and who you're becoming is the illusion that staying the same means being strong. But strength isn't staying unchanged. Strength is being willing to say, I'm not who I was, and I'm not afraid to grieve who I used to be. Consistency is not a virtue if it chains you to a self that no longer breathes. And liberation might begin the moment you stop performing the life you planned and start listening to the one that's been calling from underneath. You write the idea, you sketch the vision, you feel the rush, that sweet anticipation of becoming. But then, nothing. Days pass. The page remains blank, the project remains a plan, and you tell yourself you're just not ready, not yet. But readiness was never the real issue. It's the fear beneath it, the fear that starting might expose you, that the moment you begin, you'll lose the safety of imagining what you could become, without the risk of being seen for what you are. There's a strange comfort in preparation, in almost beginning, because as long as you're planning, you can still be perfect, still be full of potential, still untouched by the imperfections of action. This is the addiction no one talks about, the dopamine loop of becoming without crossing the threshold. You live in the rehearsal, you script the scene, but real life doesn't let you edit the moment after it starts, and that's where the terror hides, not in failing, but in realizing that even success won't protect you from the rawness of being seen. So you delay, you overthink. You refine the idea until it dies in your hands. But here's what you don't see yet. You're not avoiding the task. You're avoiding the self who must show up to complete it. The self that can no longer hide behind drafts and outlines. And maybe that's the most dangerous part of all, that you've fallen in love with the fantasy of becoming, because it lets you avoid the intimacy of being. But the life you want doesn't live in plans. It lives in the mess, the risk, the exposure. And maybe the next time you feel that rush to begin, don't write the plan. Just stand in the silence and let your unfinished self breathe. Did you enjoy the content and it made a difference for you? Click on Super Thanks and support our work. At first, it felt like clarity, checklists, timelines, measurable goals. You told yourself this was growth, that healing could be systematized, but slowly something shifted. You weren't feeling lighter, you were just getting better at performing recovery. You turned your wounds into tasks, your emotions into metrics, your transformation into a project, clean, efficient, planned. But the soul doesn't work on deadlines. It doesn't follow your calendar. It doesn't heal on command. You can color-code your triggers. You can track your progress on a spreadsheet. But no system will ever touch the place where the fracture lives, because healing is not linear, and it's not something you manage. It's something you survive, something you sit with quietly when the mask finally cracks. There's a moment when your inner manager has to step aside, the one who wants to solve everything, the one who treats pain like a puzzle, the one who thinks, if I just optimize enough, I won't have to feel this again. But some parts of you were never meant to be optimized. They were meant to be mourned, held, seen not as errors to fix, but as echoes of a self who never got to speak. Montaigne once wrote, "We are all patchwork, shapeless, contradictory, fractured in ways that no system can unify." And maybe that's the beginning of real healing, not fixing, not improving, but allowing the parts of you that don't make sense to simply exist, because wholeness isn't a plan, it's a surrender. And some days, the most honest thing you can do is stop trying to be better and finally let yourself be real. It doesn't have to be dramatic. It doesn't need to be loud. Real change doesn't announce itself. It begins as betrayal, quiet, internal, necessary. You were taught to fear chaos, to believe that if you stop following the script, everything will collapse, that without your routines, your roles, your carefully managed identity, you will disappear. But maybe what disappears isn't you, it's the performance. Jung called this individuation, not the creation of a new self, but the return to what was buried beneath all the noise. A rebellion not against the world, but against the internal empire that demanded your silence. You don't need to burn everything down. You only need to stop obeying what's killing you, not all at once, just one small betrayal at a time. Say no to one rule, one should. One lie that tells you who you must be in order to be worthy. These are micro-transgressions, sacred disruptions. The moment you answer your inner tyrant with a whisper, "No, not today." It starts when you stop apologizing for your contradictions, when you stop pretending you're okay just because you're functional, when you choose truth, even if it costs you the comfort of your own story, because the script you've been living, it was designed to be safe, not alive. And aliveness. Aliveness begins where compliance ends. You don't have to destroy your life. You just have to stop editing yourself to fit inside it. The moment you disobey the version of you that would rather be accepted than alive, that's the moment the real self begins to speak. And it doesn't need permission, only space, only silence. Only the courage to be unrecognizable, even to yourself. There's a version of your life that looked perfect on paper. The career, the relationship, the future. It had direction, stability, admiration. But if you trace its origin, you'll see it wasn't born from desire. It was born from fear. That dream job? Maybe it wasn't a dream. Maybe it was a way to feel useful enough to be safe. Maybe it was a shield, so no one would see how lost you felt underneath. Because when the world demands performance, planning becomes armor, a defense against vulnerability, a strategy to feel untouchable, admired, needed, but not seen, not known, not loved, not as you are, but only as you function. You crafted a plan to be unbreakable, but in doing so you became unreachable, even to yourself. And now, when the plan starts to crack, when the path you followed starts to feel hollow, you don't know what's worse: letting go of the plan, or admitting it was never yours to begin with. That's the turning point, when you stop asking what's next and start asking what's true. Because maybe what you wanted was never success. Maybe it was peace. Maybe it was rest. Maybe it was the quiet courage to exist without justification. You don't need a better plan. You need to escape the story that made planning your only form of protection, and in that escape, something else awakens. Not a roadmap, not a guarantee, just direction, organic, unscripted, rooted in something that doesn't need validation to exist. You were not meant to live inside a plan. You were meant to feel, to break, to rebuild, to let your life become a reflection, not of fear, but of presence. And when you stop defending yourself from life, that's when you begin to live it. You've spent years trying to find the way, searching for the formula, hoping that if you just plan better, think harder, execute cleaner, life will start making sense. But sense doesn't live in your calendar, and meaning was never hiding in the next milestone. Sometimes, the real path only reveals itself when you're willing to walk without one. Not because you've given up, but because you've stopped pretending that control is the same thing as direction. Jung knew this. That the self, the true self, doesn't emerge from certainty. It emerges when the persona breaks, when the role collapses, when the inner script no longer fits the body that's been suffocating inside it. And that's what you are. Not broken, just overscripted, layered with stories that were never yours, covered in rules that once protected you, but now imprison you. You don't need more steps. You don't need a guru. You don't need to optimize your way to wholeness. You need to betray the roles, betray the routines, betray the narrative that said, you can't be loved if you're not in control. Because real freedom doesn't start with clarity. It starts with surrender. To the unknown, to the unfinished, to the version of you that exists only beyond the map. Nietzsche said, become who you are, not build it, not design it. become it, by removing everything that was never true. So maybe this is the moment, not to plan, but to fall into the quiet, into the truth, into the you that's been waiting, not for direction, but for release. There is no plan for your soul, only movement, only fragments, only the raw, beautiful silence of a self finally breathing outside the blueprint. You are not lost. You're just finally stepping off the path that was killing you. And yes, there is still time.